My name is Maria Corpuz. I used to say Corpus, and then I realized that I've been saying my name wrong the whole time. So it's Corpuz is how they would say it in the Philippines. I believe I'm still saying it right. See, I'm still not even sure. I'll start out kind of just with my childhood. I went to Mary Our Queen, a Catholic school out in West Omaha, and I remember asking my mom if I was adopted because the other Asian girls in my class were all adopted. And so I was like, well, I must be adopted too. And she's like, no, here's the photo of you. I'm holding you in the hospital. Like, I can't just fake this. And obviously my dad is Filipino. So I just thought like adopted equals Asian growing up. And then I think that my brothers really had a bit of a harder time because they look more Asian than I do in the stereotypical sense of Asian. And they've gotten called slurs. For me growing up, it was getting asked, where are you from? No, but where are you from? And I'll always say Omaha. I'm always just like, I'm from Omaha. Because I know what they're trying to ask. And if it's a person of color, I'm totally usually into it. I'm like, yeah, I'm Filipino, like, what are you? And I love geeking out about that. But for some reason, when it comes from some person who is white, I just kind of like get defensive, especially if it's a white man, because and we've seen it this past week of like the fetishization of Asian women. And I can just sense it in my gut that that's what's happening. And especially with just the history of America and the Philippines, and the imperialism and the calling out of us as savages, it's not a good feeling to be asked that by a white man, just because I feel like it brings up all of that history in my like ancestral line of that. And I mean, people are always shocked when they find out that my dad is the Filipino. And I now realize how messed up that is, because white American men could just like go pick out a wife in the Philippines. And so that's like led to people being like so surprised that my mom is actually the white person in that relationship. And it's just kind of left me in a space. I was on a call last night, a woman Zoom meetup, Google meetup for Asian American and Pacific Islander women. And I hopped on and there was 25 women from across the country, and we were just sharing our feelings and our stories. And a lot of the feelings were of disconnect, because I think when you look at like what happened in Omaha this past summer with the uprisings in the Black community, they've been working so hard for their freedoms that they are organized. And somehow I know that back in like the 1960s, the 1980s, probably Asian Americans were more organized. But as of recent, I think that that's been really lacking. And so all of us consistently, from the girls in Omaha to across the country, we're all just feeling a sense of disconnect and not really knowing what community that we have to like go just like be with and share space with during these times. Because like you don't really know how to talk about it to folks who aren't Asian, because like of the experience. It's almost like having to prove why I get to feel sad. It's hard not to see myself. And I think it's hard not seeing myself in places. I think that growing up, I look very ambiguous. And so I would get called like Hispanic. I got called like Mexican. And these are both out of love and out of racism. I think both of these things have happened, that I've gotten mistaken for other identities. I've gotten mistaken for like being Native. A few times have been mistaken for being Black, and I just am like, you must not see a lot of brown people. And I think that's like one of the things in Omaha, especially growing up in West Omaha, is that folks don't see a lot of me. And so if I'm just with my mom, people think that I'm adopted. And it's funny, even when we're like with my dad, like Asian folks don't be like, you know, Asian don't raisin kind of thing. My dad looks really young. And so people have even asked if she's adopted 5 kids when they've had 4 together, and they like group my dad in with us. Which is really, that's been a weird thing to have. Or if it's my dad and I out, people have assumed that we are in a relationship, and I'm like, this is my dad. But that's like, I think that because of the fact that Omaha remains so segregated because of the past and redlining, and because of the lack of wanting to nurture diversity in our city, at our city level, folks don't feel comfortable to leave their community and meet others. And so not growing up in a community of Asians or of Filipinos, I've never had that sense of community. I met the girls I went to school with. I have a dear friend, Ronnie, who I went to high school with, and we reach out to each other when this stuff happens and chat about it. And luckily, I've been putting myself more recently in my adult life in these places to reach out to Asian women that I meet. I'm really excited because I'm starting to organize with some of them, and we really want to plan something for this week. What that looks like, we're meeting tomorrow, so I'm not sure yet. But it just, like, after being with women last night on this call and like all feeling, it's hard for us to give ourselves permission to feel some sort of way about this. Like, we feel guilt. Somebody said, I feel guilty for being this sad, and like I shouldn't be this angry. And I think that as Asian women, we're expected to just kind of be submissive and quiet and small and act this way. And we don't want to do that. Like, that's not us. That's not me personally. I have a personality. Not that other people don't, but like, we're just like, boop, this is the box and is what is expected of you. And that's just like not the way that it is. So it's been good recently, but I think growing up, I would have loved to have more community and connection to men and women and any person who is of Asian descent. I think that's the other interesting thing that we were kind of talking about last night as well, too, is that there's already a complexity amongst Asian races. Like, especially in my example of the Japanese, like my grandmother has some feelings about Japanese folks and of Chinese folks, because both of those countries had invaded the Philippines. And so it's ironing out those while also standing in solidarity with them in the moment and in the now, because right now we're just getting grouped together by white folks. So it was really, I'm very lucky to be at this point in time, because I think that we as Asian people are coming together despite our own history, because we understand that right now there's a bigger white supremacy happening in our country, and that's bigger than our past history, and it's affecting all of us. So I think that it'll be really powerful to continue to organize for this and to partner up with organizations in the past who have previously organized to help find some support and stability for moving forward, especially like with the whole bomb that happened recently at the Nebraska Chinese Association, and it hasn't been called a hate crime yet, and I don't know if it will. It's just like, it's happening here, and it's happening in micro ways, and it's happening in macro ways, and I just like want it to end. I just don't know, like, I don't really know how to end such a big problem, but it makes me really sad, especially when I think about like my little sister and my brothers, and when you think about the people that you love and how it affects them, even if like we don't talk about it. It's just like, that's where I start to get emotional. It's when the people that I love are affected and hurt. So my Lola, which means grandmother in Tagalog, which is one of the many dialects of the Philippines, she is 93. She's been saying that she's 94 because after the year changed, and I'm like, you're 93, and she's like, well, this year I turned 94. I'm like, you don't turn with the new year. But so she was born in the Philippines, and so was she had my father and his brother in the Philippines as well. But she was a preteen when World War II broke out, and back then they had to like go to the next town to go to school, and her and her brother didn't have a ride back, and they were one of the last ones when like everything was shutting down. And so one of her best friends was like, you better get in the car with me right now and go home so we can go back to our town. And so they got in the car, went back home, and her father was a tax collector. So they were probably upper middle class in the Philippines, which is a total different class. Like, the class system is obviously different than what it is here because it's a third world country, which I don't really like using that term. So they left their house, and they verged off the main pathway that the Japanese were coming through. And they left behind all their animals, and their parrot had just learned to talk. It's like one of my favorite, like, oh, the parrot just learned to talk. But they left, and they lived in a house with a few other families, a farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere for a few years. And after the war was over and they were journeying back, Lola's mother, Maria, passed away from an asthma attack before they had even gotten home because of the fact that hospitals weren't open yet, and so she wasn't able to have access. So especially when this pandemic hit and I was like really learning all of these things about my family history, because I was starting to interview Lola and just ask her more questions, and I heard that, I just like broke down, because I was like, there's a respiratory disease happening right now, and that's how your mother died during a war. And my Lolo, my grandfather, and my dad my Lolo died of a heart attack, and I think I was talking about this before, but my dad has already had one for sure, and 2 scares. And so then Senator Vargas's father passed away from COVID, and he had heart conditions, and all of this was like discovering my history with the pandemic and what was happening just like made me so scared. And especially because like Black and brown folks are dying at a much higher rate, and for multiple reasons, whether it's like lack of access, lack of money, lack of health insurance, pre-existing conditions because of the places we've been put in, because of the trauma that we faced, is like higher stress. Anyhow, I digress. Back to Lola's kind of story. They made it out of the war, and she went to college and got her degree teaching English, and she met my grandfather actually at a very young age, and then he proposed, but he was in America, and he was a psychologist, so he was working here, and after 2 years was able to bring over my grandmother and my father and his brother. And when they moved here, they moved around, and they finally settled in Galesburg, Illinois, which is a very small town and is known as like a railroad stop. And it's very interesting because the way that personally I see the older Asian generations talking about these topics like of race, like Lola will say, well, racism people just started really talking about it recently. And I'm like, well, no, Lola, like during the 60s, especially, the race was a huge thing, but they didn't move over here till they moved over here at the end of the 60s, but because they're in such a small town, like she didn't see it. And when I ask her, well, Lola, when are the times that you have experienced racism? And she recalled 2 times. And the first time was when a girl's family that she was teaching requested not to be in her class because of her thick accent. And I was like, well, how did that make you feel? And like, what did you do? And she's just like, well, that's just the way it was. Like, I couldn't go crying to the principal. I didn't want to like lose my job. And so, they just don't talk about it, and they just like keep on moving along. And the second time was when my mom's parents were worried that once my dad proposed to my mom, they were worried that the grandchildren would be brown. And whether or not, I was never able to talk to them about this because they've both passed, and whether or not that was rooted in racism or in concern for the way we were going to be treated, I think that no matter what, there is an underlying systemic racism that they learned from being an upper middle class family. But that Lola remembered that, and like I can't like imagine how she would feel like hearing that, like, oh my gosh, this family that we're about to be like tied to is worried about the color of our skin. And my dad, I mean, they ended up getting married. They ended up loving my dad because you can't not love my dad. He's funny and he's kind. I say he's funny first because I get my humor from him. But I just had never heard that from her before. And so that was like one of the things that I was like, wow. So you agree that racism is a thing, and it has been a thing, and now we're talking about it. And, I'm really glad that it's been a continued conversation and it hasn't just stopped at one, because as we continue to talk about it, she will say, well, you can't let it affect you so much because it's just going to keep happening. And like, I get angry at that, and I understand where she's coming from, and like, it's a hard truth, but I'm like, how could you not work to at least end it, and to at least work to like heal that? But it felt like very defeatist to hear from her, like, they're always gonna, it's ingrained in them. It's ingrained in white people to be racist. And so I refuse. I refuse to just give up because of that. And she understands. She like loves me, and she loves what I'm doing. And I think that their generation doesn't want to admit that there's racism against us because that makes us the other. And they've worked so hard to not be the other. And like, I'm proud to be the other. Like, I'm so grateful of my history, of my ancestors' history, but I see it and I disagree with it. I like refuse to be okay with the fact that, oh, well, racism just is. So we have these conversations, and we work at trying to like, what would it look like for us? What has it looked like for us in the past? And, just recently, before this past week really heightened, but when it was just kind of really starting, this Asian violence was really starting, I brought it up at the dinner table. We have like family dinners every Sunday night, and I just really started to talk about, what has racism looked like for all of us? And how does all of this make us feel? And I'm so glad I did that, because we've never really had that conversation. Like, we didn't really talk about race growing up. And I think that that's part of the Asian culture, is like, you don't really talk about feelings. And so like, I'm the odd one out because like, I cry at everything. I cry at birthdays. I like cry at newspaper articles and movies. And Lola will sometimes be like, why are you so emotional? And I just am like, you had to not be emotional because of all the trauma you faced. You had to like learn to keep your feelings in this box in order for survival. And I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to cry when I feel like it. And so she just kind of laughs at me, which is fine. But it was good to hear my dad give voice and hear him, because he is generally like pretty quiet and subdued. Like, my mom's a talker, I'm just like her, and like, you know, he's the guy who's like, when he does say something, it's hilarious. But he's a total softie too, and he's like, I totally get my empathy from him. And I think that like kind of comes with like anxiety too. Like, they won't really call it anxiety, they'll call it stress. And I'm like, no, I'm so anxious. It's because of the stress, it's tied in, but like, I'm okay to say I am anxious. And I think that their generation and mental health is a whole nother topic. But it was really powerful for me to witness him speaking about his feelings, especially on the fact that he was like, I feel guilty for giving you and Katie, myself and my sister, your brown skin, because I understand that it will be hard for you to find a partner, because generally Asian women are the least likely. Like, you'll see on TikTok videos like, what's the race that you wouldn't date? And it's like Asians. And he just started crying. And of course, like, I was probably already crying or crying more. But to like hear him say that, and that's something that he worries about, I had like never heard that. Because it's either just like, we're discarded growing up, and like that's how I kind of felt, especially growing up in predominantly white neighborhoods and schools. Like, boys didn't like me. And then now it's like, well, boys don't like me, or they fetishize me. And so I think to like hold space for my dad in that moment, it's really interesting to see the dynamic. And like, Lola started crying too, and she never cries. And I can see my mom wanting to push back and say, no, Ralph, our kids are beautiful. And it was like, Mom, like, it's okay. Like, we can let us all experience this, and you can believe that we're beautiful, but he can still feel bad that we're brown. And he feels responsible for that. And that's okay, even if it's not what we believe. So I think like right now it's really important to hold space for folks who are Asian specifically right now in this moment, because we're working through this friction in society, but we're working through this friction in our own families, because a lot of families don't talk about this. And so to start talking about this is hard, or to start talking about this isn't possible because the generations above me don't want to believe that it's happening. And and I'm really generalizing here, but from the folks that I've talked to who are my age, they're like, yeah, my family hasn't checked in on me. Or one woman was adopted and none of her family had checked in on her, even though she posted to Facebook being like, I need community. And it was really interesting. On a side note, this past week, when it all happened, I just noted that my black and brown women friends were the ones who reached out to me. And that's who I needed to reach out to me. But I was also angry because we're all volunteering, we're all organizing, we're all being active in our communities, we're working hard, we're like providing for our families, and then we also have to take care of each other. And it's like, who I want to take care of me, but it's like so much. I'm like, oh, who do I need to reach out to, like, I don't really have time, but I'm gonna like make time to at least just like say that I'm here and that like I'm sad too and I'm angry. And I think this past year I've been really getting a little bit more comfortable with saying that I'm angry and being okay with that, and then saying, well, now what am I going to use this anger for? And to like push for change where I see that it's needed with this like anger. So the concept of just like staying with anger instead of like shying away from it. I told these women I was in this chat with yesterday. I was like in the bathtub on Wednesday when this is all happening at like 2 p.m. and I just like wanted to listen to a meditation. And the woman was like, see if you can detach from your feelings and just look at it and witness it. And, this poet said that if the ocean can calm itself, you can too. And I was like, how do I detach from racism? Like, how do I detach from my identity? Like, I understand, I go to therapy, I have 2 therapists. Like, I understand, like, seeing my feeling and holding it, but when it's so tightly engrossed in who I am, I don't see a way to really detach from that. And I want to be angry, and I think it's okay to be angry. So I, like, wrote a little bathtub poem and, like, shared it with that woman last night, and I just, like, all of their heads were like shaking and we were all just like crying together and holding space for each other. And it was comforting to hear that we're all feeling disconnected from our families, from a community or lack thereof, and from ourselves. We're not really, as I would say that my ancestors, and because of imperialism and because of white supremacy and because of assimilation, we haven't learned the tools of how to properly deal with this. And so I'm working to figure out what tools I need that I can go back and share with my family and with my community. And I think that's what one of the reasons that I love about going back and talking to Lola is because I've lived with her for 20 years. She's lived with my family and taught me so many things. And now I'm going back and learning the history that was taken away from her. Because by the time she got to school and through education, she had books from the US and didn't learn about Filipino culture in the way that I believe she should have. And that was on purpose. And so now her mindset is that of Americans from her at a very young age. And so it's really interesting to compare and contrast what I'm learning now of that time, like right before her, like before she was born. Americans were calling us savages. And we were getting shown at world fairs, on display. But she just has this they have this beautiful idea of what America is and the American dream and success. And if we are hard enough workers, then we're going to make it. And I had a friend recently tell me, because she's like, you need to slow down, you're doing too much. And I was like, I can't slow down. Like, I have this just like immigrant hustle mentality that I have to keep going and like prove myself and like I don't quit. And she just said to me, you've already made it. Like, you don't have to hustle anymore. And I like cried when she told me that. Because I just like, I needed her to like provide that space for me to like, to start that unlearning process. But I'm like, I'm not good at it. I was working till like midnight last night and like this whole week. But it's an unlearning process of a lot of different things, and it's hard work. And I'm just like, can I get paid to decolonize my mind? Because it's a whole job. It's like a full-time job of unlearning these things and untying yourself from the colonialistic mind that we've grown up in, and being proud to be Filipino and being proud of the work that my Lola and my Lolo put in, and my dad to like make us, to bring us to this point, and have pride in that, but to also understand that like it's so much more than success and making it and being American. Like, what is that? So it's a healing process, and I'm really proud to share it with my family and my community and you right now. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to work through it all right